Amen. All right, if you've been tracking with us for a few weeks, or actually months, you know that we have been searching for a what we call primary teaching pastor. Jeff and I will be part of the team, but this will be the main person who is being on Southland. And we've got three men up here to speak to you. Today is our third. And I want to encourage you, after today's message, if you'd like to stick around, we're going to have a meet and greet, and you can talk to them together, husband and wife, and we encourage you to stick around for a few minutes to do that. Also, you'll notice in your bulletin and a couple of places that we would love your feedback. As elders, we really want to hear from you about what God has done and how He used these people to speak into your lives, and what do you think about all this, and just encourage you to use the online way to do that. I was reminded this week that there's a passage in Acts chapter 15, verse 22, that if you go to the New American Standard Bible, and you have one of those at home, but there's a translation that their elders are making a decision about some people and leaders. And there's a line at the end of that that says, and it seemed good to the whole congregation. And that was like, oh, I want to hear from you as elders about how it seems and how it feels. So you're a big part of this, and I want to thank you already for the amount of feedback you've given. So without further ado, let me invite Dan Franklin to come on up. Would you welcome Dan as he comes? Dan and his wife Karina comes to us from a suburb of Portland, Oregon, where he is a pastor at a church there. And he has a couple of boys and a wife, and been in ministry a number of years. He's a graduate of Master's College with a bachelor's in biblical study, and he is also a graduate of Multnomah Bible Seminary with a bachelor's and then a master's of divinity in exegetical study. That just means you look at the Bible text and study it and get what it says, right? That's right. That's the hope. And so he's here today to do just that. He's here today to just close us off with Ecclesiastes. And so, Dan, thank you, and God bless. Thanks. Good morning. Yeah, this is so fun. Third service, we've had the state circle for so long. We've really been looking forward to being here. Everybody's been really warm, so it's been fun to get to know all of you. I do want to take a minute, Gary mentioned my family, I want to take a minute to introduce you to my family members who aren't here. I have a couple pictures. This is my almost 4-year-old son, Jack, and the one word I usually describe him is goofball. He's just a real free spirit, fun-loving kid. He's not really into organized sports. He's not really into organized anything. He's kind of, as I mentioned, he's a free spirit. Like more musical and artistic, and he loves to dance, because we don't know where he got that from. Not really but he's a lot of fun. And my older son named Matthew, which is 6 years old. There's a picture of Matt. And the one word I use to describe him is intense. He's a very intense, focused little 6-year-old, and academically and athletically. And you can see, this is kind of a funny note. We can't quite tell that he's wearing a Dodger shirt. Is that racial, right? You guys are going to split Dodgers and Angels. Angels is fine as long as it's not Giants. All okay with me. But he's wearing an A's hat, and the reason for that is because that was his baseball team last year when he played. Now, here's how Matt works. I don't know why this happened, but 2 years ago he was on Pirates for his baseball team. And as soon as he got that Pirates hat, he did not leave his head other than bat sign for a year. And then 1 year later, when he got on the A's, he got the hat, and there was like this ceremony that he did at the game. Took off the Pirates cap, put on the A's hat. It's been on ever since. Baseball season's long over. And then, as Gary mentioned, my wife Karina is over here. We celebrated 10 years earlier this June. And our third child, who you can't see, but here she is very tiny. Everybody's like, I don't see anyone. So anyway, we're excited about that, expecting number 3. That's happened, and we're just excited to get to be with all of you. And at the same time, I recognize this is the 3rd week in a row of a special speaker, and some of you might be getting fatigued from the special speakers. And at the same time, some of you might be here this morning and you're really interested. You want to say, I want to see what this guy's like, I want to see where our church is going. But there are probably a lot of you who are here saying, I just don't even care. I want to hear from God.
And, my greatest desire is to be a part of that this morning. I can't bring you hope. I can't bring you life. I can't fix you. I haven't fixed me. God is the one who does that. And so I'm hoping that we come face to face with Jesus. And if I decide that as well, really like you, that's fine too. Let me go ahead and pray for us. God, I thank you that you are a God that saves us. Thank you that you speak to us. Thank you that you don't leave us in the darkness, but you want us to walk in the light. God, thank you that you love us enough. And you want us to walk in the light that you have offered, and ultimately that you offer to Jesus. I pray that we come face to face with you, and I pray that we experience the hope and the life that you offer because of an experience in you and your word. In Jesus' name, amen. Most of you know, today is the last day in Ecclesiastes. I get the great privilege of wrapping up the book of Ecclesiastes by walking through chapter 12. And before I get into chapter 12, I want to tell you about my favorite TV show. 24. Any fans out there? All right, good. Good company, good taste. It's no longer on the air. Just finished up this last year. Now, if you're not familiar with 24, the basic concept is Jack Bauer, who's up there, and the people that he works with, working counter-terrorism. So there will be some kind of terrorist threat to the country, a nuclear weapon or some kind of coup or something like that. And Jack and his team are working around the clock trying to find a terrorist threat and thwart it. And an active element of the show that makes it really interesting is that each season of the show takes place over the course of one 24-hour day. So it starts at one time and then just runs 24 hours until everything is resolved. And each episode of the show takes place in real time over the course of an hour. So the show kind of gives you two levels of tension. One of the levels of tension is that there's danger around and you're wondering what's going to happen. And the other level of tension is that the clock is always ticking. And you're wondering what's going to happen. In fact, each season, as it's drawing to the end, there will be just chaos everywhere and all kinds of things happening. And, there's a mole in the White House, and the terrorist has a nuclear weapon, and Jack is being tortured, and his family is kidnapped, and all of these things are going wrong. And you look up and you say, they've got 2 hours to wrap this whole thing up. And bring all these storylines together. Are they really going to be able to do it? Now, I bring this up because some of you might be feeling a little bit like that right now with Ecclesiastes. You might be looking at Solomon right now and saying, all right, 11 chapters of you going after thing, and you keep coming back to that word meaningless. You can't find meaning anywhere. The world seems insignificant and seems meaningless. Now you got one chapter. Are you going to wrap it up? Solomon, clock is ticking. And right at the moment where we look at Solomon and we say the clock is ticking on you, he turns right back and says, no, the clock is ticking on you. Solomon is going to wrap up Ecclesiastes. It's kind of been his journey. It's been his story. And as he wraps up Ecclesiastes, he's going to bring it to a point of resolution. He's going to look at us and call us to a point of decision. And he's going to call us to a decision quickly. And say, time is running out. We don't have forever. In fact, the specific thing that Solomon does in this passage is he invites us to embrace God and embrace God's wisdom before time runs out. And through this chapter, he's going to tell us, time's running out in 2 ways. First of all, time's running out on you and I as human beings. And secondly, time's running out on this world. So I just want to walk through the passage now. Starting in chapter 12, verse 1, Solomon starts off by telling us that time is running out on us. And he begins, just so you know, I'm reading out of the New International Version here, the NIV. And in verse 1, he gives us a command. The command that sort of oversees the rest of this first part of the passage. He says, remember your Creator in the days of your youth. Before the days of trouble come and the years approach, and you will say, I find no pleasure. He gives us that command. Remember. And you may know biblically that remember, when he's using that, he's not just saying jog your memory. All the way back in the book of Exodus, people of Israel are in slavery in Egypt, and it says God remembers his people. And that doesn't mean that God says, oh yeah, the Israelites, I should do something about that. That means that God acted in light of the fact that he had a relationship with the Israelites. He decided to move on. So when we're supposed to remember, it's not just jog your memory, make sure you don't forget God. It's live in life the reality. In fact, there is a God, that He is present, that He has communicated, and that He's offering up wisdom for how to live. And He says, remember in the days of your youth, because pretty soon days are going to come and you're not going to find any pleasure in them. Like, so why would we find any pleasure in the later days? Well, he starts to explain it, and he goes through this really creative and powerful poem about the aging process. And it begins in verse 2, as you can see. It says, before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars grow dark, and the clouds return after the rain. And what he's talking about here is sort of the fading mental abilities as you grow older. The clouds returning after the rain is probably talking about the memory. Things just kind of become clouded. And, as you get older, it starts with not remembering where your keys are, or where you park the car, and then it moves much more serious with Alzheimer's and dementia, where you can't even remember or recognize the members of your family. So your mental abilities are going to start to fade away. He goes on with this poem in verse 3. In verse 3 he says, when the keepers of the house tremble, and here he's talking about the hands and the arms, and sort of the guards of the body. And sometimes you'll see with an older person, if they're signing a card or signing a check, that they have a hard time because their hand is trembling as they do it. He says that the keepers of the house, the hands and the arms start to tremble. The strong men too, which is probably talking about the back, the legs, as you see sometimes with older people, they start to stoop over and lean forward. They talk about the grinders sleeping because they're abused. You can probably figure it out now. Grinders are the teeth. It says the grinders don't work as well. One of the reasons they don't work as well is because they start to fall out. There's not as many of them around, and there aren't dentures and solvent time. So you got to eat soup and mashed potatoes and stuff like that because they just don't work as well. And he says, and those who look through the windows, the eyes, they grow dim. You also can't see as well. He goes on to verse 4. And he says, when the doors of the street are closed and the sound of grinding fades, and this is probably talking about the ears now, how hearing starts to go away. You can't hear as well the things outside. And then Solomon mentions sort of this ironic thing that happens in old age. He says, when men rise up at the sound of birds, but all their songs grow faint. He says, this is kind of sad irony, that as you grow older, the smallest noises tend to wake you up. And I'll talk to older people about this, and I just got to be honest with you. The whole idea of being aroused by the police sound, I'm really not looking forward to that. Man, I like my sleep. I talk about sleeping in, people who are older say, oh, I can't do that anymore. And I think, oh no, you gotta be kidding me. Yeah. Have you ever had a time where you just caught up on sleep and you just got to sleep in and you rested until the point where you said, man, I couldn't sleep another moment. I haven't. And I can always sleep a little bit more. So I'm not looking forward to this idea that the least thing is going to really get my sleep. But he says, there's a sad irony because you can't sleep in. You can't get a lot of sleep because the little noises wake you up. And at the same time, your ears don't work well enough for you to enjoy the beautiful sound of life anymore. And from both sides, it's a sad progression. Verse 5. He says, when men are afraid of heights and dangers in the streets, and just this idea of growing more feeble and kind of retreating. And when you're young, you're wanting to go out, you're wanting to conquer things, you're wanting to find things, and find adventure. And as you grow, you start to retreat a little bit more because things become more difficult and more dangerous. And things that used to be easy are really painful and difficult. And he says, when the almond tree blossoms, which is talking about the white flower blossoming, and it's talking about the hair, turning from dark to white. And the grasshopper drags itself along, which is kind of a confusing one, but it's probably just giving an illustration of the feebleness of old age, as you just kind of drag along much more slowly. And he says, the desire, he was talking about sexual desire. Something that's celebrated through Ecclesiastes and Proverbs and Song of Songs is this great gift, this wonderful joy that God has given for us to experience, the man and a woman in marriage, this wonderful gift of sexual intimacy. And he says, yeah, even that, you're not going to be able to enjoy that either as your body starts to deteriorate and as you start to grow old. And finally, after this aging process, he says at the end of verse 5, then man goes to the eternal home, and mourners go about in this region. After this sad deterioration of the body and you die. He illustrates this again in verse 6, some analogies about that. He says, remember, reiterating, remember, it all is the same, remember God before this happens. Remember him before the silver cord is severed and the golden bowl is broken. And this commentators kind of differ on this, but we probably talked about the silver cord is probably the spinal cord, which actually is silver, and the golden bowl is probably the head. And what he may be referring to here is something like a stroke, where the spinal cord and that brain are involved, and that's the cause of death. And he gives another analogy. He says, before the pitcher is shattered at the spring or the wheel broken in the well. And almost certainly here he's talking about the heart being the pitcher, pulls the water of life, pulls the blood, and the wheel being the arteries and the veins that send that blood to all the parts of our body. So he might be referring to a heart attack, or just the simple fact that the heart stops beating. Death is coming for us, the clock is ticking, time is running out. And then thinking about that, he says, the dust returns to the ground it came from, and the spirit returns to God. And we go back to where we came from. Our bodies are made from dust, we go back to the ground and we decompose. And we turn back into that. And Solomon actually, in this super uplifting passage right here, he does give a little glimmer of hope. You're all like, is this going to be the way the whole time? It gets better. But it does give this little glimmer of hope. And I put chapter 3, verses 19 through 21 up there, just as a cross-reference. Chapter 3, verses 19 through 21 of Ecclesiastes may be the most troubling passage in the whole book. Ecclesiastes is one of those books that you can't just read one section, figure out what it means, and take it as God's final word to you. This is a progression, this is a story. That would be like watching the middle of a movie and trying to figure out what the movie is about. You've got to get to the end. But in chapter 3, verses 19 through 21, Solomon, in his frustration, he says, who really knows that men are any different than beasts? Who knows that the beast spirit goes down and that the man spirit goes up? I mean, kind of has this idea, well, we don't really know if we're eternal at all. Well, here in chapter 12, he seems to have drawn a conclusion. As our bodies go back down to they come from, and the spirit returns to God, where it came from. So he has given us this glimpse of eternity, even in this dark, sad poem. And finally, in verse 8, he returns to his favorite word, his favorite phrase, the whole book. Meaningless, meaningless. But everything is meaningless. This whole aging process, this whole sad life, nothing good about it. He's not sprucing up old age, saying it's really not that bad. He gets to the end and he says, aging and death, that's not meaningful. That's not the way to find meaning in life. I'm going to return to that in a minute, but first I want to go back to verse 1. All right, we kind of walk through this poem that he wrote. Or back in verse 1, he says, all right, before all this happens, before this deterioration and death happens, remember your Creator. Bring to mind and live in life the wisdom of the Creator. And says, and this is the day for you. Now, why is it so important that we keep God in mind, live with God in mind in the days of our youth? Well, I want to give you a couple of reasons, but first of all, I want to say, it's not because there's not still an opportunity to turn to God in the Lord. It's not because a point comes when God says, all right, you've had your moment, I'm not listening to you anymore, you got to deal with your own sin. God is always holding out that offer to the very last moment. And there's a beautiful story in the book of Luke where Jesus is next to the thief on the cross. And it's interesting because the thief uses the same word as the passage. He asks Jesus to remember him. And Jesus says, you're going to be with me today in paradise. So Solomon's not saying, remember him in your youth, because pretty soon God's going to say, I'm not listening to you anymore. It's not that. What it is at least two things. First of all, he's saying, remember him in your youth, because these are the main decision-making years. You make decisions in your youth that affect the rest of your life, and if you're chasing the wind, if you're not listening to God's voice during these times, you're going to be saddened by the decisions that you make. Your youth is the time when you normally make the decisions about what you're going to do with your life, where you're going to go to school, and where you're going to work, and where you're going to live, and who you're going to marry. And if you're not walking in God's wisdom during that time, you're going to search yourself. And when I think of this, I always think of this woman that my wife and I knew. Back when I first graduated from college, I was a youth pastor in Oxnard. I grew up down here in Southern California, so I was a youth pastor in Oxnard. And Karina and I worked with a woman who was probably about 40 years old at that time. She worked with us in the student ministry. She was a great lady, really sold out for Jesus, really solid, and let us small group and work with our gals. And she had gone through a period of her life. She was really walking hard with Jesus. But she went through probably about a decade where she chased her woman. And that decade was her late teen years into her late 20s. About those 10 years, she just did her own thing. And, in some ways, the way our logic goes when I look at it and say, all right, let's say you live 70 years, 10 years doing your own thing, 60 years doing God's thing, that's pretty good odds. But those 10 years were significant years. And during those 10 years of rebellion, she got married. And she married a baby. Now, as we knew her, the relationship wasn't abusive. They were still together. She was really trying to work it out. But as you can imagine, somebody devoted to Jesus being married to an atheist, it was a painful experience for her. It brought grief and difficulty into her life because she's trying to respect him and honor him, and at the same time she's trying to raise her kids and tell them about Jesus, and their relationship was torn because he could see how devoted she was to Jesus, and at the same time she didn't get that, and she didn't believe in any of that. The decisions that you make when you're young, they impact the rest of your life. It is the wrong time to lose track of God's wisdom. It's to keep God's wisdom in mind when you're young. And also, keep God's wisdom in mind when you're young, because these are the best years of your life. You don't want to be chasing the wind. That's the best years of your life where you can be working and giving yourself to work, and giving yourself to your children, and giving yourself away in significant ways before your body starts to deteriorate and you're much more than it. Just don't waste these opportunities. It's not that there's not forgiveness, but you'll never get those opportunities back. So don't wait. Don't postpone it. When we're young, we're not thinking about that. But Solomon says, remember your creator. Don't live as your own king. Don't live as your own God. But remember your creator in the days of your youth. And again, after he tells this poem, he gets to verse 8, he gives that refrain, meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless. That's a reminder, he's got it up on the wall. Although I imagine they'll probably come down next week. You guys are going to read that up as like a mission statement for new people to come in. That's interesting. Because Solomon comes here after the ancient prophet's death. This is like a final frustration for him. And he says, throughout the book, he's coming to meaningless. He says, well, I tried money, because I think it makes sense. It seems like if you got enough money, you'd really be happy if you find satisfaction. But that didn't work out for me. And so I tried pleasure. And I just said, anything my body wants, I'm going to say yes. But pleasure didn't work, and that was fading, and it didn't really satisfy me. And so I tried accomplishments, but I had to pass those along to other people. And I tried wisdom, but there were things you just can't track down and can't figure out. And I tried to find justice, but that was elusive. And just frustration after frustration. And maybe the passage that expresses Solomon's frustration and how life doesn't work is the passage I wrote there, chapter 9, verses 11 and 12. You can read along, or you can just listen to me if I read it. Actually, back into the slide before. Chapter 9, verses 11 and 12, he says, I've seen something else under the sun. The race is not to the swift, or the battle to the strong. Nor does food come to the wise, or wealth to the brilliant, or favor to the learned, but time and chance happens to them all. Moreover, no man knows when his hour will come, as fish are caught in a cool net, or birds are taken in a snare. So men are trapped by evil times, and all unexpectedly upon them. Solomon just says, nothing works like this. It's not fair. It doesn't make sense. The smart people don't get what should be coming to them. The good people don't get what's coming to them. Talk about different times when it's like the fool ends up being the king and the wise person ends up being cast aside. It's like life doesn't work and it's frustrating and it doesn't make sense. But then after a whole life of seeing meaningless encounters where nothing works and nothing makes sense, then your body breaks down and then you die. Because if this is the end of the story, it's not good. There's nothing good, there's nothing beautiful about the aging process in Solomon's mind. And it's interesting, there's this elder that at the church I'm at right now, that I meet each Wednesday. His name is Tom, and he's interesting, and it's just an amazing guy. He's a missionary for a long time. And he's in his mid-80s. And it was so funny on Wednesday, because I was talking through the passage with him just to get some feedback. And the whole time I'm reading this analogy of old age, he's kind of nodding his head. Yep, that's what it's like. Yep, pretty much. Yeah, handshaking, yeah, that's what it's like. But you don't have to wait until you're mid-80s to start to experience the body breaking down. We experienced it much earlier. All right, Psalm 33. Several months ago, you know what I found? Now, it's not what you think it is. Probably most of you are thinking gray hair. Not gray hair. Much worse than gray hair. I didn't find gray hair. I found ear hair. Ear hair. Who ever heard of that? So before coming out to Life Bible Club lectures, I had to trim my ear hair. And I wish I was joking. The body starts to break down. There's nothing pretty about that. There's nothing glorious about the aging process. Solomon's not looking at it and saying, oh, how beautiful. As the body starts to break down and deteriorate. He is not into this. He's not okay with this. Because that's the end of the story. And that's meaningless. And that's frustrating. And that's terrifying. And we do all kinds of things. We deal with the aging process and death coming to us, and we try to stave it off in all kinds of different ways in our culture, whether it's through surgery, or special diets, or spending money. We try to avoid it, we try to push it back, and some of that is misdirected, but I think ultimately that comes from the fact that we look at that and we say, that's not good, it shouldn't end that way. Solomon says as much in chapter 3, verse 11, when he says, God has put eternity into the hearts of mankind. We know we're made for more than this. This can't be the end of the story. And at the same time, the clock is starting to break down, starting to go that way. And Solomon says, remember the Creator before that time comes. You never get those opportunities back. And don't squander the best years of your life chasing the wind. But thankfully, this isn't the end of the story. He says, time is running out on us, on you and I, on our bodies. But time is running out in another way. Time is not only running out on us, time is running out on this world. And this is Solomon beginning to move to his conclusion, beginning to move towards positive resolution. And he says of himself, speaking of himself as a teacher, verses 9 and 10, not only was the teacher wise, but he also imparted knowledge to the people. He pondered and searched out and set in order many proverbs. And we know that from the book of Proverbs, which we had just a couple books earlier. And the teacher searched to find just the right words and what he wrote upright and true. So Solomon basically spends these verses saying, I'm wise, I wrote upright and true things. He has a very positive self-image. He doesn't struggle with self-esteem. But what's Solomon doing here? He's not bragging. He's not trying to draw attention to himself. He's saying, I'm about to give you the conclusion. And you should listen, because these aren't thoughts just off the top of my head. I have tracked down every option. I have tried everything. I've given of myself. And it's not just so that I can figure out knowledge and wisdom and what makes sense in life, so I can pass it along to all of you. We better listen up. Because this is the wisest man who ever lived, who went on a journey to track down meaning. And he's saying, now I want to give it to you. Verses 11 and 12, as he begins to continue to build towards it, he says, the words of the wise are like goads. And this is sort of like a shepherd that's nudging the sheep in the right direction, getting them off the bad path and onto the good path. And so that's what wise leaders are like. They get off the bad path onto the right path. He has another analogy about wise leaders. He says they're collective sayings. So the collective sayings of the wise are like firmly embedded nails. And this is sort of the idea where we're trying to hang up this board, or we're trying to hang up this window, and that's sort of our commitment for life. We're trying to find something to hang it on. We try different nails, it doesn't quite work, and it keeps falling down, and we can't see light clearly. He says, but there are these wise sayings, the collective wise sayings. They are those firm nails that nail that to the wall so that you can have a framework to see life clearly. God doesn't give us answers to every question we want answered. But he gives us a framework. Solomon says they're like firmly embedded nails, and they're not made up by any human. They're given by one shepherd. God passes those along. And then he warns them. He says, be warned, my son, of any conditions. Of making many books, there's no end, and much study here is taught. Together, the favorite verse of every high school college student pass along to their professors and teachers. You know what the Bible says about this? But Solomon's not saying, if you're a reader, you're not saying, well, don't read, there's no point to it. What he's saying is, God has given us a framework for looking at life, a grid that makes life make sense. But if you spend your life trying to track down answers to all the obscure questions in life that God hasn't given you the ability to know, you're going to frustrate yourself and you're going to exhaust yourself. Because there's always another book, there's always another philosophy, there's always something new that's just going to tire you out. Don't exhaust yourself that way. Go beyond the grid that God has given you. That's enough. And finally, in verses 13 and 14, he comes to his conclusion. He He says, now all has been heard. Here's the conclusion. Fear God and keep His commandments. So this is the whole duty of man. And you can see, I put it up here. In verse 1, we have the command to remember God. Live in light of the reality that is there. And very similarly now, at the end of this passage, in verse 13, he says, fear God. Which Jeff and Garrett have taught you, it's not the idea, it's not a cowardly fear that gets us away from God. It's a fear that draws us close to God. It's the acknowledgement of what we sang earlier in the worship time. You are God, and I am not. It's recognizing God. It's listening to Him because He's the one that has the ultimate wisdom, and it's embracing His ultimate wisdom. So fear God. Remember God. Live with God in mind. Don't live as if God's not there. That's going to lead you down meaningless roads. And then he asks the question, well, why is it significant that I fear God? Verse 14 tells us. Fear God, for God will bring every deed into judgment, including everything, whether good or evil. Fear God, because there is a final judgment. There is a final sorting out of things. Things are unjust in this life. Things don't work out the way they should. But there is a final sorting out that God is going to bring. The New Testament gives us more information and makes it more clear that this is at the return of Jesus. And Jesus, the Son of God, who came once to sacrifice Himself for our sins, He's going to come again to be the judge, and He's going to set Himself up on the throne. There will be final judgment. So he says, fear God, because that final judgment is coming. And let me just ask a quick question about it. The idea that there's a final judgment where God brings everything into light, whether good or evil, that's good news or bad news. And sometimes what we do is we sort of split God up and we say, well, we love to talk about God's love and we love to talk about God's grace because that's the good news about God. But then we're sort of embarrassingly, begrudgingly, well, we've also got to talk about this judgment thing. We kind of wish it wasn't there. It's sort of the bad news about God. You know what? There is no bad news about God. And anytime we buy into this idea that the judgment of God is bad news, implicitly we're saying, I can make a better God than the one that's out there. There is no bad news about God. And God's judgment, we really take a moment to think about it. This is not bad news. It's not bad news to Solomon. He says, I've gone through this frustrating life and I can't find any meaning and things don't go the way they should. Things seem backward and crooked. But one day God's going to sort it all out. This is His hope. And for all of us, and all the pain that we face, this is a great hope for us. This is good news that God sorts it out. I was with a friend earlier this week, and he was telling me a little bit of his story. It was a sad story, one that we've all experienced different elements of. But about 10 years ago, he experienced real injustice. He was fired from his job. And the reason he was fired was because they found inappropriate internet sites visited on his log. Now, it wouldn't be unjust for them to fire him for that, but the reason it was unjust is because he was away camping when these sites were accessed. And he came back, he said, obviously this is inappropriate, but I was gone, he broke the speed, he actually didn't have people that saw him out there show it, there's no internet access out there. There was somebody else at the work who hadn't logged in because he was in training, and so it was pretty obvious what had happened. But they said, it doesn't matter, you're logged in, you're responsible, and they fired him. So he lost his job. And not only did he lose his job, as you might imagine, his reputation took a hit. Because people just assumed he was he's slandered, he's fired, he's embarrassed, he's ashamed. It's found out later that the person hired to replace him was a relative of the president of the company. So the whole thing is just very shady and very sad. He hasn't gotten vindication. Nobody's apologized to him. Nobody's made a public statement of anything. When we experience the injustice of this world, we find hope that one day God's going to sort it out. All the hidden things, God's going to bring those things out. And this is great news. Because that means that there is real meaning and real purpose. This world isn't random, flying out of control. This world doesn't work right now because the ruler of this world is the enemy. And his days are numbered. And when Jesus returns, the ruler of this world won't be ruling anymore. And there will be a king in town, and he's going to sort it all out. This is good news that God's final judgment is coming. And at the beginning of the message, I mentioned 24. how much I love that show. And every season you're waiting to see, is the resolution going to come? Are they going to wrap all these things up? And they always do. But each season ends with a sense of the bittersweet, where things get wrapped up, but there's some huge tragedy, where somebody paid a great price for these things to be fixed. And ultimately, as you go through the story, that's sort of like life. Any resolution we get is partial. We get partial happiness, and we get partial pleasure and partial justice. When Jesus returns, it's going to be completely sorted out. It's all going to be good news. It's all going to be fixed. The psalmist says, "Fear God, remember God. Embrace God's wisdom while you still have time." And he calls us to do that by laying this wisdom out to us. And we would do well to listen to Solomon's wisdom. But we would do even better to listen to the wisdom of one that Solomon ultimately points forward to. Now, let me show you Matthew 12, verse 42. Passage where Jesus is speaking to the first century Israelites. And he says, "The queen of the south will rise up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it. For she came from the ends of the earth to listen to the wisdom of Solomon. And now one greater than Solomon is here." Solomon, in all of his wisdom, points us forward to the ultimate wisdom of God, which 1 Corinthians calls Jesus, the wisdom and righteousness of God. Solomon, at the end of this book, he says, you got to listen to me, because I sacrificed for this. I gave of myself, and not just so that I would benefit, but so that all of you would find wisdom and find life. And he points forward to the one who, in a much greater way, came and sacrificed his life, poured out on the cross, and not just so that he could get all the accolades, but so that we could benefit and have life. It'd be a good idea to listen to Solomon, but it would be a better idea to listen to God, who maybe in his greatest commandment, God the Father said to the Son at his baptism, "This is my beloved Son." Do you remember the next word? Listen. Solomon is telling us, embrace God's wisdom before time runs out. And the most significant way that we can embrace God's wisdom before time runs out is to embrace the ultimate wisdom of God, and that's Jesus. To embrace Jesus and all he is, to trust him and to listen to him, to hear his voice and to draw close to him, to be his disciple, and trust his wisdom against anything else that we find. Embrace God's wisdom before time runs out. Time is running out on us. You don't know when you're dead. You don't know if you're going to grow old and die. Death is coming for us. Our bodies are going to deteriorate. We're not always going to be as we are right now. Don't waste your best years chasing the wind. Embrace God's wisdom. And embrace God's wisdom also, because time is running out on this world, and the judgment is coming. And it's good that the judgment is coming. It's only bad news that this world is facing judgment if you're too attached to this world and you don't want to see God. This world doesn't work because this world is going, this world is going. Don't stay attached to it. Don't chase the wind in this world. Don't chase money, as Solomon talks about. Don't chase and try to track down money. Solomon would say, I have more than you'll ever have. It doesn't work. Be generous with your money. Give it away. Be free from it. Don't try to track down needs and pleasure. Don't give away your purity for a few moments of pleasure. It's not worth it. Solomon says, man, I have more than you'll ever have. Stay this moment. Trust God in what he calls you to do. And don't chase the wind by trying to track down every answer that might be out there. Trust God. Listen to his grid. Listen to the grid of the gospel and trust him that he has given us the wisdom that we need to draw near him and to find him in your life. And we don't need to exhaust ourselves by tracking down every single thing and every possible answer. Embrace God's wisdom before time runs out. And in a moment, the team is going to come back out and we listen to one last song. And if something has really struck you, something has hit you in a meaningful way, and you're saying, man, I really want to respond. I want to respond to drawing near to Jesus, to embracing God's wisdom. Or if there's something you care about, afterwards there's going to be a prayer team that meets right over here to the left, and they would love to get to talk with you and pray with you and work through any of the things that God has put on your heart. And so as the team prepares for a final song, let me just go ahead and pray for us. Father, thank you again that you are not silent. You haven't left us in the dark. So much of the time this world seems meaningless and we can't make sense of it, but you haven't left us in the dark. You've given us your life. You have offered to us your wisdom in its ultimate form. In Jesus, who came to rescue us from all of our darkness. And thank you for your life. Thank you that you offer life to sinful people who don't deserve it at all. And thank you that you offered your wisdom to people who can't figure out life without you. May we embrace your wisdom before time runs out. May we be urgent about it and find you and try to open the life and the healing that you offer. In the name of Jesus. Amen.
Would you stand? And as we sing this song, just declare these truths as we remember our Creator. The Creator who has promised to be faithful. The Creator who has promised never to leave us, to love us unconditionally. Let's remember that. work together for my good. You make all things work together for my good. Praise the Lord. You make all things work together for my good. You make all things work together for my good. God, we stand in that truth. God, help us to go out and live.